Hello, my friend. The world of magic, filled with legends and ancient tales, is opening its gates once again. Tonight, in the Gryffindor dormitory by the crackling fireplace, I will share another story with my friends. Join us, for the magic is about to come alive. The wind swept over the Carpathian peaks, whispering through the valleys like a voice carried from another time. Below, nestled in the rugged heart of Romania, the dragon sanctuary lay sprawled beneath the heavy sky, its boundaries marked by twisting ironwood fences and runes etched deep into the stone. Charlie Weasley stood at the edge of a craggy outcrop, his arms folded against the cold, golden eyes fixed on the creatures moving in the valley below. Dragons, great, magnificent beings, stirred restlessly in their enclosures, their scales catching the last light of the setting sun. The sanctuary had always been alive with their presence, the deep bellows of Hungarian horntails echoing through the canyons, the lazy spirals of Antipodean opalays carving ribbons of silver against the sky. But now something was wrong. Charlie exhaled slowly, his breath misting in the chill. He could feel it in the air, something unseen, something old. A silence where there should have been the constant, rumbling voices of dragons calling to one another, the familiar thunder of wings against the wind. A flicker of movement drew his attention to a ridge below, where a Romanian longhorn, a mighty male named Vlad, lay sprawled against the darkened rock. His emerald scales, once so brilliant they gleamed like polished stone, had dulled. His sides rose and fell with slow, labored breaths. Charlie's heart tightened. Vlad had been one of the first dragons he had worked with when he arrived years ago, a creature of impossible beauty and barely tamed ferocity. The sanctuary's healers had been trying everything, but the illness, whatever it was, remained a mystery. With a final glance at the ailing dragon, Charlie turned and made his way down the winding path toward the keeper's lodge, his boots crunching against the loose stones. The sanctuary was a place of wild things, of roaring fires and smoke curling into the sky, of leather-bound tomes filled with dragon lore stacked high on wooden tables. The scent of firewood and the metallic tang of dragons lingered in the air, and the walls were lined with tools of their trade. Iron-reinforced gloves, tongs for handling enchanted chains, glass vials filled with restorative potions brewed by careful hands. Tonight, however, the usual hum of conversation was muted. The keepers, seasoned dragon tamers and scholars alike, sat in uneasy silence around the long wooden table. Some stared into their half-drunk cups of tea. Others ran tired hands through their soot-streaked hair. At the head of the table, Gregorovitch, the sanctuary's oldest and most revered dragon healer, stood with his hands pressed flat against a map of the reserve. His face, lined and weathered from a lifetime of working with the fiercest creatures in the magical world, was drawn with concern. Charlie pulled off his dragonhide gloves and sat down. "You've been up to see Vlad?" Gregorovitch asked, his voice rough but not unkind. Charlie nodded. "He's getting worse." A ripple of unease passed through the room. "It's not just Vlad," Lena, one of the senior healers, said, her dark brows knitting together. "It's spreading. The young horntail, Garrick, he refused to eat today, and the opali, Sorsha, she hasn't flown in 3 days. Charlie frowned. Dragons not eating, dragons not flying. It was like the pulse of the sanctuary itself was fading. No common ailment does this, Gregorovitch murmured. No curse, no known poison, not even dragon pox. A heavy silence filled the lodge, broken only by the soft hiss of the fire in the hearth. Charlie looked down at the map spread across the table. The sanctuary was vast, stretching over the mountain ranges with deep forests and hidden caverns where the dragons nested. What if it's not an illness? Charlie said slowly. Gregorovitch turned his keen eyes to him. Then what do you think it is, Weasley? Charlie hesitated, searching for the right words. Dragons are tied to magic in ways we don't fully understand. If they're growing weak, it might not be because of something in them, but something around them. Lena tilted her head, considering this. You think something is affecting the land? Charlie ran a hand through his hair. I don't know, but I think we need to look beyond what we can see. Gregorovitch sighed and straightened. Then we will look. If magic is shifting, we will find where. There is a legend, an old one, very old, about a place where the fire of the dragons first came into this world. The Heart Fire. Charlie's pulse quickened at the name. The Heart Fire, an ancient tale, whispered through the ages. It was said to be the first ember of dragon flame, a mystical energy that had shaped the oldest dragons, hidden deep in the mountains, its power long forgotten by most. Gregorovitch leaned over the table, tracing a gnarled finger along the northern peaks. There are old caves, far beyond our borders. We do not go there, no one does. But if there is magic failing in this world, then perhaps we must go where the old fires still burn. A murmur spread through the keepers. The northern mountains were treacherous, home to creatures few had seen and fewer had returned from. Charlie felt the weight of their gazes, but his resolve hardened. He had spent his life working beside dragons, feeling their fire and learning their ways. If there was even a chance that the heart fire was real, if it could help, then he had to find it. Oh God, he said. Gregorovitch's gaze lingered on him for a long moment before he gave a slow nod. Then we will prepare. The decision was made. Charlie rose from his chair, stepping outside into the crisp night air. Above, the sky stretched wide and endless, the stars cold and brilliant. He glanced back at the sanctuary, at the dragons lying silent beneath the moon. Something was calling to him, and tomorrow he would answer. The night stretched wide and endless, the sky above the dragon sanctuary vast and unknowable, an ocean of silent stars that shimmered like 1,000 unseen eyes. The air smelled of damp earth and distant smoke, of pine sap and cold stone, of the faint metallic tang of dragonfire long since cooled. Somewhere in the distance, the low, guttural rumble of a slumbering Hungarian horntail rolled through the valley, like the whisper of a coming storm. The creatures were never truly silent, not even in sleep. They muttered in their dreams, exhaling bursts of warm air that rose in spirals, as though some primal memory still played out behind their closed lids. Ancient battles fought in a time when men were not yet arrogant enough to believe themselves masters of the world. Charlie walked slowly, his boots pressing into the wet soil, the rough-hewn path winding its way toward his cabin. He had spent so many years here that the sanctuary felt more like home than the burrow ever had. There was something raw, something true about this place. The wind here did not lie. The dragons did not scheme. A creature of fire and wings knew no pretense. It would look you in the eye and see you as you were, unvarnished, unhidden. There was a purity in that, an honesty that human beings so often fail to offer each other. But tonight, something gnawed at the edges of his mind, a feeling he could not shake, as though the mountains themselves were holding their breath, waiting. He had felt the shift before the others had, the absence of something, the dulling of the flame that lived inside these great creatures, the loss of a spark not just in their bodies but in something deeper, in the marrow of their existence. It was more than an illness. It was as if the dragons had begun to forget what they were, as if the fire inside them was slowly being stolen, ember by ember, until only cold ashes remained. Inside the cabin, the air was thick with the scent of parchment and ink, of aged wood and the lingering memory of burning herbs. Protective wards set in place long ago, their magic now faded to the faintest whisper of what they once had been. Charlie lit a lantern, the flame flickering against the worn books stacked haphazardly across his desk. The titles were a chaotic tapestry of dragon lore, on the elemental nature of worms, the alchemy of dragon's breath, runes of fire and stone. Some were filled with careful notes in his own cramped handwriting, questions scribbled in the margins, theories half-formed and abandoned. He sat heavily in the old wooden chair, the weight of the evening pressing against his ribs. His fingers traced absent-mindedly over the rough leather binding of a book on ancient dragon habitats, his mind already drifting toward what lay ahead. The Heartfire. It was a legend so old that even the oldest dragon keepers spoke of it only in whispers, as if saying its name too loudly might call forth something best left undisturbed. And yet, wasn't that always the way with forgotten things? They lingered at the edges of the world, waiting for someone reckless enough, desperate enough, to go searching for them. A soft knock at the door broke his thoughts. Charlie glanced up, momentarily startled. Visitors were rare at this hour. He stood, crossing the room in a few strides, and pulled the door open to find Lena, her dark eyes shadowed by something unsaid. She was one of the most skilled healers in the sanctuary, a woman who understood dragons in a way that was almost unsettling, as if she could hear what they did not speak aloud. She was wrapped in a heavy wool cloak, the ends damp with mist, her arms folded against the cold. "I thought you might still be awake," she said, stepping inside without waiting for an invitation. "You never sleep when something's wrong." Charlie sighed, running a hand through his hair. "Neither do you." She didn't argue. Instead, she pulled off her cloak and draped it over the chair near the hearth, moving with the quiet grace of someone accustomed to navigating spaces where silence meant survival. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The fire crackled softly, the scent of smoldering wood filling the space between them. Lena sat at the edge of the desk, her fingers absently tracing the rim of an empty mug. Gregorovitch sent me to talk you out of it, she said finally. Charlie leaned back against the wall, arms crossed over his chest. And do you plan to? She exhaled sharply through her nose, something almost like amusement flashing across her face. No, she admitted. I plan to ask you what you think you're going to find. He considered that for a long moment. What did he think he was going to find? Salvation? Knowledge? The last embers of something long extinguished? Do you believe in lost things? He asked quietly, staring at the lantern's glow. In things that exist just beyond what we understand, waiting for someone to go looking? Lena's lips parted slightly, but she didn't answer immediately. Instead, she looked toward the window where the mist curled around the mountains like a living thing. I believe in stories, she said at last. And I believe that some stories are more than just words passed down, but I also believe that forgotten things are often forgotten for a reason. Charlie tilted his head. You think I should leave it alone? I think, she said slowly, that if the heart fire is real, if it ever was real, then you are not the first to go looking for it. She turned her gaze back to him, her dark eyes searching his face. And yet, there is no record of anyone who ever returned. That truth settled between them like dust on old pages. Charlie let out a slow breath. That's exactly why I have to go. Lena studied him, something unreadable in her expression. You sound like a man who's already made up his mind. He gave a half smile, tired and knowing. I am. A pause. Then, Lena pushed herself up from the desk, reaching for her cloak. Then, I'm coming with you. Charlie straightened. Lena, don't argue, she interrupted, her voice calm but firm. If there's even a chance that this is real, you shouldn't go alone. And if it's a fool's errand, at least I'll be there to say I told you so before something eats us. He wanted to argue. He wanted to tell her that this wasn't her burden, that if something went wrong, he didn't want her blood on his hands. But he knew better than to fight with someone who had already decided. Instead, he only nodded. Outside, the wind had shifted, carrying with it the scent of something distant, something ancient. The mountains waited, the dragons dreamed. And somewhere, in the darkness beyond the known world, the heart fire burned. Tomorrow they would begin. The dawn arrived slowly, creeping over the peaks with a cold reluctance, as if the mountains themselves were unwilling to surrender the night. The sky was a deep indigo at first, tinged with a bruised sort of gold where the sun threatened to rise, though its light seemed weak against the iron-cast clouds still clinging to the ridges. The sanctuary lay in a hush that was deeper than silence, the air thick with the scent of wet stone and lingering embers, of earth damp with morning mist, and the unmistakable metallic tang of dragonfire. Charlie stood at the edge of the main enclosure, watching as the dragons stirred with the slowness of old kings roused too early from their slumber. Vlad, the Romanian longhorn who had once been a creature of terrible beauty, lay curled beneath the jagged rock formations, his body still as if he were listening to the mountain itself breathe. His scales, dulled now to a lifeless green, caught only the faintest glint of morning light, There had been a time when this beast could turn the sky into fire with a single exhalation, when the crack of his wings could scatter a herd of centaurs from 100 yards away. Now, there was only the slow, rattling breath that dragged in and out of his massive frame, the sort of breath that spoke of something breaking, not yet broken, but dangerously close. Charlie exhaled and ran a hand down his face, the roughness of his palm pressing against the exhaustion that lived beneath his eyes. He hadn't slept, not really. Sleep felt like a luxury he could no longer afford. The weight of this place, of the creatures that depended on him, had settled into his bones long ago, but now it had taken root in a way that felt different, heavier. There was a shift in the air, something unseen but present, like the way the sky darkens just before the first crack of a storm. It was not just the dragons that were failing, it was the land itself, the magic that coursed through the bones of the mountains, the unseen force that had once made this place feel alive. Lena appeared at his side, her presence as quiet as the mist curling over the rocks. She was still pulling on the heavy folds of her cloak, the hood slipping down to reveal her dark hair, twisted in a loose knot at the base of her neck. The firelight from the nearby torches caught in her eyes, making them glint like polished obsidian. She did not speak immediately. Instead, she followed his gaze toward the longhorn, watching the slow rise and fall of its ribs as though listening for something beyond sound. "You look like a man walking toward something he's not sure he wants to find," she said finally, her voice a low murmur against the wind. Charlie huffed a quiet laugh, though there was no humor in it. "Maybe I am." He shifted his weight, crossing his arms against the chill, the worn leather of his dragonhide gloves creaking with the movement. "Every instinct I have is telling me this is a bad idea, that there's something about this legend that we were never meant to unearth." Lena tilted her head, considering his words. "Then why go?" He hesitated, not because he didn't have an answer, but because there were too many answers, all tangled together like threads in an old tapestry. He could tell her the simple truth that the dragons were dying and this was the only lead they had, but the truth was rarely simple, and he had never been the sort of man to accept things at face value. He had spent his entire life studying creatures that should have killed him a dozen times over, and the thing he had learned, more than any book or lecture could ever teach him, was that everything in this world had a price. Every legend, every whispered myth, every ancient truth buried beneath centuries of dust was hidden for a reason. I don't know," he admitted finally, his breath curling in the cold air. "Maybe because I need to believe that some things in this world are still worth saving, that there are forces greater than decay, that not everything beautiful has to fade into ruin." He glanced at her, his expression unreadable. "Do you ever wonder if magic itself can die? Not just in people, not just in creatures, but in the world? If there are places where the old magic, the kind that existed before we had words for it, can wither like a plant left too long in the dark?" Lena studied him for a long moment before answering. "Magic is a living thing," she said, her voice thoughtful, measured. "It breathes, it shifts, it changes, but all living things can be wounded, maybe even killed." Her gaze flickered toward the mountain ridge, where the dark line of the trees stood unmoving against the sky. If the Heartfire is real, and if it is what the legends say, then maybe it is not just fire. Maybe it is something older, something woven into the fabric of this place, something that has been holding this sanctuary together in ways we never understood. She turned to face him fully. If it dies, what happens to everything tied to it? The question hung between them like the ghost of something unspoken. Charlie inhaled deeply, letting the cold air burn the inside of his lungs before releasing it slowly. Then we have to find it before it's too late. Lena nodded once, a silent agreement. Then let's not waste any more time. By midday, the two of them were standing at the edge of the northern boundary, where the sanctuary's lands bled into the wilds of the Carpathian Range, where the jagged cliffs rose like broken teeth against the sky. The path ahead was steep and uneven, the kind of terrain that had never known the touch of human feet, a place where only dragons and the wind had ever truly roamed. The air was sharper here, laced with the scent of pine and something older, something that smelled like stone and magic and time itself. Grigorovich had warned them before they left, though his words had been more of an offering than an attempt to dissuade them. Legends are like fire, he had said, his voice low as he watched them pack their supplies. You think you can hold them, but they slip through your fingers, and sometimes, if you hold them too long, they burn. Charlie had only nodded, slinging his pack over his shoulder. Then I guess we'll have to find out if this one burns too. Now, as they took their first steps beyond the sanctuary's border, past the carved runes that marked the last threshold of the known world, he felt the truth of Grigorovich's words settle into his bones. The mountains loomed before them, and somewhere within their heart, the fire waited. The mountains rose like ancient gods before them, their peaks clawing at the sky, shrouded in mist and shadow. The air had a different weight here, heavier, as though thick with something more than just the damp chill of early morning. It clung to the skin, settled deep into the bones, the kind of cold that felt alive, almost sentient, whispering through the valleys like an old memory trying to be heard. The trees stood tall and solemn, their twisted roots clawing at the earth as though desperate to hold on to something unseen. The wind, once familiar in the sanctuary, now felt different, no longer a gentle force that carried the scent of dragonfire and pine, but a ghostly thing that wove between the jagged rocks, breathing through unseen mouths in the cracks of the cliffs. There was a stillness to this place that unnerved Charlie in a way he couldn't quite name. Not silence, but an absence of life, as though the very land had learned to hold its breath. He walked with measured steps, his boots pressing into the damp moss and loose shale, his senses tuned to the world around him with the quiet vigilance that had kept him alive all these years. His hands, rough with old burns and calluses from years spent handling fire-breathing creatures, curled instinctively into fists whenever the wind picked up, as though his body expected something unseen to emerge from the shifting fog. The weight of his pack was nothing compared to the weight of the thoughts circling his mind. Thoughts of the dragons they had left behind. Thoughts of the legend they were chasing. Thoughts of the way the sanctuary had begun to feel less like a place of power and more like a body bleeding out beneath their feet. He had spent his whole life believing that dragons were the last true magic in this world, that as long as they existed, as long as their wings carved the sky and their fire burned against the dark, something ancient and untamed would remain. But now, with each passing day, he had begun to wonder if even dragons could be forgotten, if their fire too could flicker and die. Lena walked beside him, her steps just as careful, her breath steady despite the incline. She carried herself like someone who'd spent too long in the presence of things she could not control, watching, waiting, always knowing that there were forces in this world that could not be reasoned with, only understood. Her gaze drifted over the ridges, tracing the jagged spines of rock as though reading a language carved by time itself. When she finally spoke, her voice was quieter than usual, as if she too could feel the hush pressing down upon them. "This place is different," she murmured, more to herself than to him. "Not just old, older than old. It feels like the kind of place the world forgot." Charlie nodded, his own thoughts echoing hers. Or maybe a place that chose to be forgotten, he mused, adjusting the strap of his pack. There are places like that, you know. Places that don't want to be found. Places that exist between what we know and what we fear. I used to think dragons were the last of those places, but maybe I was wrong. Maybe there are things older than even them. Lena gave him a sidelong glance, her brow furrowing slightly. "You think the heart fire is one of those things?" He hesitated, then exhaled, rubbing a hand across the back of his neck. "I don't know what I think anymore. When I was younger, I believed magic was simple. Not easy, but simple. It had rules, boundaries, limits. You learned the spells, you followed the laws of alchemy, you read the right books, and you understood the world. But dragons don't follow those rules. They're not just creatures, they're something else. They're not magical in the way a charm is magical, or a potion, or even an enchanted object. They are magic. They exist outside of what we can explain, and if the heart fire is tied to them, if it is what the legends say it is, then it means we've been wrong about everything. It means magic isn't something we create, it's something we remember. Something that was here long before us, waiting. Lena was silent for a long moment, her eyes flickering with something unreadable, her breath slow and measured. When she finally spoke, her voice was softer, more careful, as though she were walking the edges of her own thoughts. "It's strange," she murmured, tilting her head toward the mist that curled over the rocks. "People talk about the past like it's something distant, something that lives behind us. But what if time isn't a straight road? What if it circles back on itself, loops and twists, and some places never truly leave the past behind? What if this place, what if it still remembers something we forgot?" Charlie turned the idea over in his mind, rolling it between his thoughts like a stone worn smooth by a river. "Then maybe it's not just the dragons that are dying," he said quietly. "Maybe the past itself is fading." The wind shifted then, and for a moment it carried a scent unlike anything they had smelled before. It was not the sharp bite of pine or the damp weight of moss, nor was it the crisp, icy cleanness of mountain air. It was something deeper, something that curled into the senses like a whisper long since buried. It smelled of heat, of stone that had been kissed by fire, of embers long hidden beneath the earth. Charlie and Lena stopped at the same time, both tilting their heads as though listening to something just beyond the edge of hearing. "Do you feel that?" Lena asked, her voice barely above a breath. Charlie nodded. "We're close." They pressed on, the terrain growing steeper, the path narrowing as they climbed higher into the unknown. The mist swirled around them like living things, tendrils of white curling between the rocks, twisting through the branches of ancient trees whose gnarled roots clawed at the mountainside. The further they walked, the more the air changed, not colder but heavier, charged with something unseen. It was the kind of atmosphere that pressed against the skin, that made the heart beat faster for reasons the mind could not fully understand. Then, as they crested the next ridge, they saw it. Nestled between the jagged peaks was a ruin, half swallowed by the mountain, its stone walls blackened and cracked as though fire had once licked its edges. It was not a castle, not a temple, not anything recognizable from the world they knew. It was something older, something primal, something built before words had been carved into history. And at its center, just beyond the broken archway, there was a glow, not the flickering of torchlight nor the reflection of the setting sun, but something deeper, something alive. The heart fire, it was real. Charlie felt his breath catch in his chest, a strange mixture of awe and unease settling into his bones. This was it, the thing they had searched for, the thing that had called to them from the depths of legend. But as he stood there, staring into the fire that should not have existed, he realized something else. They were not the first ones here, and they were not alone. The ruin loomed before them like a fragment of some forgotten world, its crumbling stonework half consumed by the grasping roots of the mountain. The air was thick with the weight of centuries, carrying the scent of damp earth, of rock worn smooth by the relentless press of time, and something else, something ancient, something that stirred beneath the surface like a memory trying to break free. The glow from within pulsed faintly, not like fire as they had known it, but deeper, richer, almost alive, as though it breathed in the silence. It cast flickering shadows against the shattered archways, painting strange shapes across the walls, movements that should not have existed in a place long abandoned. Charlie felt the weight of the moment settle into his chest, pressing against his ribs like the hand of something unseen. The stories had spoken of a flame, but this was not a simple ember waiting to be claimed. This was something older, something vast and unknowable, something that did not simply burn. It remembered. He could feel it as surely as he felt the cold air against his skin, a presence thrumming through the stone, through the roots of the mountain, through the very bones of the earth itself. It was not simply a source of power. It was a thing that had watched. Leda inhaled sharply beside him, her fingers curling around the strap of her pack as though grounding herself. This place, her voice was barely above a whisper, her words slow, deliberate, as though she feared speaking too loudly might wake something that had long been at rest. It doesn't feel abandoned. Charlie's gaze flickered to her, taking in the tension in her shoulders, the way her eyes moved over the ruin, as though trying to decipher a language hidden within its fractures. "It isn't," he murmured, his own voice quieter than he intended. "It's waiting." Lena turned to him then, and for the first time since their journey began, he saw something unfamiliar in her expression. Not fear, not exactly, but something deeper, something that went beyond the simple apprehension of facing the unknown. It was the look of someone standing on the precipice of a question they were not sure they wanted answered. She hesitated, then spoke, her words slower now, thoughtful, in a way that felt like a confession. "Have you ever stood in a place where the past feels closer than the present, where the weight of time is so heavy that it makes you feel small?" She exhaled, shaking her head slightly. "This isn't just a ruin, Charlie. It's a scar, and scars don't just mark the past. They carry it forward whether we acknowledge them or not." Charlie let her words settle, turning them over in his mind as he watched the glow ahead. "Then maybe it's not just a question of what happened here," he said after a moment. "Maybe the real question is whether it ever truly ended." The thought sent a slow shiver down his spine, though he did not speak it aloud. There were places in the world where time did not move as it should, where something lingered long after the rest of the world had turned away. This felt like one of them. They stepped forward together, moving cautiously through the broken entrance, their boots pressing into the loose gravel that had gathered over centuries. Inside, the walls stretched higher than they had seemed from the outside, the architecture twisting in ways that made the air feel wrong, as though the very bones of the structure had been shaped by something other than human hands. Strange carvings lined the stone, worn nearly to obscurity, their edges softened by time, but the symbols remained. Spirals, serpentine curves, shapes that suggested movement even as they lay unmoving. The deeper they went, the warmer the air became, the glow intensifying, not like a flame flickering in the darkness, but like something breathing just beneath the surface of the world. Elena stopped suddenly, reaching out to press her palm against one of the carvings. Her fingers traced the grooves, and she frowned, tilting her head. "These symbols," she swallowed, eyes narrowing as though she were trying to remember something just beyond reach. "I've seen something like this before, in old texts, ones written before wizards divided their magic into schools, before spells had names." She turned to face him fully, her brow furrowing. "Charlie, this isn't just a ruin. It's a place of magic, older than our history, older than Hogwarts, older than the magic we know." Charlie felt the truth of her words settle into his bones, a slow and deliberate weight that sent a whisper of unease curling through his mind. He had studied dragons his entire life, had learned the rhythms of their existence, the ways in which their fire was not simply an element, but a force tied to the very fabric of the world. But if this place was what Lena suspected, if this was a place where magic itself had been something different, something wilder, something untouched by the frameworks wizards had imposed upon it, then the Heartfire was not simply a source of energy. It was something deeper, something woven into the marrow of the earth itself. He exhaled slowly. "Then "We need to be careful," he said, his voice steady but quiet. "Because if magic has a memory, then this place remembers things we were never meant to know." They pressed on, their steps slower now, more deliberate, as if the air itself demanded reverence. The walls narrowed slightly as they moved deeper, the carvings becoming more intricate, more purposeful, as though telling a story they could not yet understand. Then, as they turned the final corner, they saw it fully. The heart fire. It was not a fire in the way they had known flames before. It was not something that crackled or flickered, not something that danced upon wood or coiled into the air in tendrils of smoke. It was something more primal, something raw and unshaped, a mass of pulsing, living heat that sat suspended above the stone floor, its color shifting like molten gold, like the deepest embers of a dying star. It did not burn, it did not rage. It simply was. Charlie felt his breath catch, something inside him tightening with a reverence he had never felt before. This was not a thing to be claimed, not a force to be wielded. It was a presence, a will, a thing that had existed long before them and would exist long after. Leona inhaled sharply beside him, her eyes locked onto the fire, her voice barely above a whisper. This is more than just an ancient flame." She turned to look at him, her expression unreadable. "This is alive." Charlie didn't answer, couldn't answer, because in that moment, as he stood before something that should not have existed, something older than dragons, older than spells, older than history itself, he realized something else. They were being watched. The presence was not simply in the fire. It was in the air, in the stone, in the very essence of the place. And whatever was waiting here, whatever had always been waiting, had known they would come. The fire breathed, though it did not flicker. It pulsed in slow, deliberate waves, as though inhaling and exhaling through lungs made of molten light. It was a thing neither wild nor tame, neither comforting nor threatening, but something suspended between the two. A force beyond simple comprehension, one that had no master and no memory of being mastered. It filled the chamber with a warmth that was not heat, but something deeper, something that seeped into the skin and wrapped itself around the bones, whispering not with words, but with presence. Charlie stood motionless, his breath shallow, his heart a slow and measured drumbeat against the silence. He had spent his life around fire, had felt the inferno of a dragon's breath singe the air mere inches from his face, had watched flames coil and consume, turn wood to ash, metal to slag. But this was not fire as he knew it. This was something older, something aware. Beside him, Lena barely moved, her arms wrapped around herself as if bracing against something unseen. Her gaze was locked onto the pulsing core of the heart fire, but Charlie could tell that her mind was somewhere else, further, deeper, as though the fire had reached inside her and found something hidden, something long buried beneath the weight of time. She exhaled, slow and measured, then finally spoke. her voice quiet, cautious, as though she were speaking not to him, but to the presence in the room itself. "This isn't just fire," she murmured. "It's memory." Charlie's brow furrowed, but he did not speak. He let her words settle. Let them breathe in the same slow rhythm as the light before them. Lena continued, her voice shifting, thoughtful, heavy with something that went beyond simple knowledge. It's like when you find an old book, one that hasn't been touched in centuries, and you open it to find that the pages still hold the scent of the hands that once turned them. Or when you stand in a place where something terrible happened, and even though the years have passed, you can still feel it, like the very ground remembers the weight of what it once bore. She exhaled, her breath uneven now, and her fingers twitched slightly where they rested against her own arms. This place, this fire, it's not just something that exists. It's something that remembers, and it's remembering us. Charlie swallowed, his throat suddenly dry, though he did not know why. He wanted to argue, to tell her that memory was something that belonged to the living, that fire had no past, only the present moment of its burning. But he could not, because standing here before this thing that pulsed and breathed without lungs, that filled the air with something thicker than warmth, heavier than heat, he knew, he felt it, deep in the marrow of his bones, a certainty that had no logic, no proof, only the undeniable weight of knowing. "Then what is it remembering?" he asked, his voice low, steady, though inside he felt anything but. Lena did not answer immediately. She let the question settle, let it take root in the space between them. When she finally spoke, her voice was softer now, almost reluctant. "I don't think it remembers in the way we do," she said. "It doesn't recall events like a person would. It doesn't hold on to stories the way a book does. It remembers existence itself. It remembers the way the world felt before time began to name things. It remembers what it means to simply be." Charlie's stomach tightened. He knew what she was saying, even if he did not fully understand it. There were things in this world that existed beyond the grasp of human language, beyond the reach of even the most ancient spells. Magic had not been created by wizards. It had been found, and before men had named it, before they had shaped it into spells and incantations, it had been something else, something raw, something vast, something like this. He took a slow step forward, the air thickening as he neared the fire. The light did not burn him, but he felt it pressing against him, wrapping around him like unseen hands reaching, not to harm, not to claim, but to understand. He lifted his hand, hesitated, then extended his fingers toward the pulsing light. The moment his fingertips crossed the threshold, something shifted, not in the room, not in the fire, but inside him. His breath caught in his throat, and suddenly he was falling, not in body, but in mind, in soul. His consciousness pulled backward, downward, inward. The world tilted, the air folding in on itself, and for a brief, terrible moment he was nowhere. And then a dragon, vast and endless, wings stretching across a sky of burning gold, its body wreathed in flame, not fire as the world knew it, but something truer, something older than light itself. It was not a beast, not a creature, but a force, neither living nor dead, neither born nor bound. It soared through an ocean of stars that had not yet been named, a thing that had existed before the world, before time. And then the vision cracked, splitting apart like shattered glass, and Charlie gasped, stumbling back, his body cold despite the fire's warmth. Lena caught his arm, steadying him, her eyes wide with alarm. "Charlie, what happened?" He struggled to find his breath, to piece together the fragments of what he had seen, of what had seen him. His pulse pounded in his ears, his mind still half trapped in the space beyond thought. Finally he swallowed and forced the words out, though they felt too small, too human, too limited to contain what he had just experienced. "I saw..." He hesitated, shaking his head as though trying to shake loose something that had latched onto his thoughts. "I don't know what I saw, a dragon, but not like any dragon I've ever known. It wasn't just a creature. It was fire, it was the sky, it was everything." He looked at Lena, his breath still uneven. It wasn't just alive, it was before life. Lena's grip on his arm tightened slightly. "Charlie," she said slowly, carefully, "I don't think the heart fire is just some ancient source of magic." She glanced back at the pulsing light, something unreadable flickering in her gaze. "I think it's what dragons came from." The words sent a slow, creeping chill down Charlie's spine, even as the warmth of the chamber pressed in around him. He looked back at the fire, his thoughts twisting, unraveling, reforming into something else. If Lena was right, if this wasn't just a relic, but the source, then it wasn't just a question of saving the dragons anymore. It was a question of whether something older than time itself could be dying. And if it could, what did that mean for everything it had created? He exhaled slowly, the weight of understanding settling into his chest like stone. "We need to find out why it's fading," he said at last, his voice steady despite the storm of thoughts raging beneath it. Lena nodded. "Before it disappears completely," and in the silence that followed, the fire pulsed once more, as if it had been listening, as if it knew. The fire pulsed again, slower this time, as though exhaling in recognition, a thing neither living nor dead, but lingering somewhere between, aware in a way that defied understanding. The chamber around them seemed to tighten, the air shifting, stretching, not with movement, but with the weight of something unseen, an expectation, a presence pressing against their skin, wrapping around their thoughts like ivy climbing an ancient wall. The carved stone under their feet felt warmer now, not with the flickering heat of an ordinary flame, but something deeper, something that settled into the marrow of their bones, something that carried the weight of centuries. It was not an inferno, not a blaze meant to consume. It was endurance itself, a fire that had burned for longer than memory and had never once been extinguished. Until now, Charlie's hands curled at his sides, his fingers itching with the phantom sensation of what he had just seen. Or had it been something deeper than sight? That dragon, that vast and unknowable thing wreathed in fire, had not simply been an image, but a feeling, an imprint of something lost in the folds of time. He could still feel it in the back of his mind, a flickering presence, a thought that did not belong to him but had buried itself within him all the same. It was as if he had touched not just fire, but the first fire, as if he had glimpsed the very moment magic itself had sparked into existence. A world not yet shaped by words, not yet contained by spells or wands, or the limitations of human understanding. Lena watched him carefully, her own thoughts a shifting sea beneath the surface of her composed expression. She had seen something too, he could tell by the way her fingers twitched against her cloak, by the way her breathing was measured, deliberate, as though she were grounding herself in the reality of stone and air after standing too close to something that did not belong to this world. Her voice, when it came, was quieter than before, but not in fear. It was the kind of quiet that carried weight, the kind that held thought before releasing it into the air. "This isn't just a relic," she murmured, her gaze flickering between him and the fire, as though trying to see the threads that connected them both. "It's not just something ancient, not just a forgotten source of magic. It's alive, Charlie. It remembers, and it's asking something of us." Charlie turned her words over in his mind, letting them settle, tasting them against the backdrop of everything he had ever known about dragons, about magic, about the things that existed beyond the reach of human hands. She was right. The heart fire was not simply fading, it was waiting, searching, reaching for something that it could not grasp on its own. But what? What could something so old, so powerful, possibly need? He exhaled slowly, the air around them shifting as he stepped closer to the pulsing core of light. The glow did not scorch him, did not bite at his skin, but it thrummed through him like a second heartbeat, whispering through his veins, a rhythm older than language. "If this really is where dragons came from," he said at last, his voice thoughtful, deliberate, "then it means their fire isn't just a part of them. It means it is them. It means that every dragon, every ember of their breath, every spark that has ever left their bodies is a fragment of this place, a piece of something ancient carried forward." He hesitated, the weight of the realization pressing against his ribs. And if this fire dies, then maybe it's not just the dragons that will fade. Maybe it's something deeper. Maybe it's the magic that makes them be. Lena's expression shifted, something flickering behind her eyes that he could not name, a mixture of understanding and something else, something heavier. "If that's true," she said, "then we have a problem, because magic doesn't just disappear, it goes somewhere. It doesn't simply unravel, it either transforms into something else or it's taken." She turned to him then, fully, her dark eyes steady, serious. "If this fire is fading, then something is either pulling it away or draining it." Charlie felt a slow, creeping unease settle into his stomach, though he had no reason to doubt her words. He had always believed that magic was like a river, something that flowed, something that could not be created or destroyed, only reshaped, redirected. And if something was stealing the fire, leeching its power from whatever ancient source had given birth to dragons themselves, then it meant they were not simply here to witness the end of something. They were here to stop it. He turned his gaze toward the far end of the chamber, where the carvings on the walls had grown denser, more intricate, spirals and patterns woven into each other in ways that did not make sense, as if the stone itself had been molded rather than carved, shaped by something that did not use hands, something that understood creation in a way far beyond human craftsmanship. He stepped closer, his fingers brushing against the grooves, tracing the symbols as though trying to read a story left behind not in words, but in movement, in shapes that carried the weight of understanding rather than language. And then, beneath his fingertips, the stone shifted. It was not an illusion, not a trick of the light. The carvings trembled, rippling like water disturbed by a single drop of rain, and in the space between one breath and the next, the chamber moved. The fire pulsed sharply, a sudden flare of light flooding the space, casting long, stretching shadows against the walls as the air thickened. As the warmth grew too warm, wrapping around them not with comfort but with urgency. The ground beneath them did not shake, but the space itself seemed to bend, as though something beneath the surface of the world had stirred, as though some deep, slumbering presence had turned its gaze toward them. Charlie barely had time to react before the shadows at the far end of the chamber shifted, and something moved within them. Not the flickering of firelight, not the simple shifting of mist. Something real, something watching. Lena stiffened beside him, her breath sharp, her body tensed as her eyes locked onto the darkness beyond the flame. Her fingers twitched toward the wand at her hip, but she did not draw it. Not yet. Not when they did not yet know what it was they were facing. Charlie's pulse pounded against his ribs, but he did not step back. He could feel the presence now, not just see it, not just sense it, but feel it, like the press of unseen hands against his chest, like the weight of an ancient gaze settling over his skin. And then, slowly, it stepped forward. A shape, half formed in the flickering light, neither fully solid nor fully shadow. Something that wavered between being and not being. And yet, as it moved, as the firelight touched its edges, Charlie saw the impossible. Scales, dark, ancient, shifting like oil across stone. Wings folded tight against its body, as though they had not been used in centuries. Eyes, glowing not with fire but with something deeper, something that burned like the last embers of a dying world. A dragon, but not like any dragon Charlie had ever known. Not living, not dead, something between, something forgotten, something waiting. And as the heart fire pulsed again, the presence before them exhaled, its voice curling through the air like smoke, like memory, like something that had not spoken in ages. You should not have come here. The voice did not come from the mouth of the creature before them, for its lips never moved, its throat never shaped the words. It came from within the chamber, from the walls, from the stone, from the very air they breathed. It resonated in the marrow of their bones, in the empty spaces between heartbeats, a sound that was not sound at all, but something older, something woven into the fabric of existence itself. It was the weight of forgotten things given voice, the echo of a world before this one, before dragons had been known, before magic had been tamed. Charlie's breath was slow, steady, but inside he felt something shifting, some fundamental truth of the world tilting beneath his feet. The dragon before him was not of flesh and blood, not entirely. Its form wavered between solidity and shadow, its scales dark as the void between stars, its wings folded not against its body, but against time itself, its eyes, two endless pools of fireless gold, held within them a depth of knowing that made his skin crawl, not in fear, but in the terrible awareness of something greater than himself. He had spent his life among dragons, had thought himself a student of their ways, a guardian of their fire, but standing before this being, he felt like a child before the ruins of a forgotten empire, staring up at the remains of something he had never been meant to see. Lena inhaled slowly beside him, her posture tense, but her voice was calm when she spoke, measured and deliberate, though Charlie could hear the slight tremor beneath it. "Who are you?" she asked, though the question felt too small, too fragile for the thing before them. For a long moment there was no answer, only the sound of the heart fire's slow, steady pulse, the whisper of heat against the stone. Then, at last, the voice came again, curling through the air like the last breath of something ancient. "I am the first." The words were not spoken, not in the way a human would speak, but they filled the space between them, settling into their bones like the weight of a coming storm. Charlie swallowed, his throat dry. He forced himself to stand his ground, to keep his voice steady. "The first what?" The creature did not move, but the air around them shifted, thickened, as if the very act of remembering was reshaping the space they stood in. "The first fire, the first breath, the first wing to carve the sky." Charlie felt something cold settle in his stomach, though the air around them burned with warmth. He had known, somewhere deep in his mind, that this place was older than anything they had words for, that the heart fire was not simply an artifact, but something essential, something foundational to the existence of dragons themselves. But this was something more. This was not just a dragon. This was the beginning of dragons, the source, the ember from which all others had been kindled, and it was dying. Lena exhaled sharply, glancing at Charlie, and for once he could see the flicker of uncertainty in her eyes, the weight of understanding pressing into her mind as it was pressing into his. She turned back to the creature, tilting her head slightly, her voice softer now, edged with something almost like reverence. "You said we should not have come here. Why?" The dragon's golden eyes did not blink, did not shift, but the space between them bent, as though the room itself was caught in the pull of something unseen. "Because you will bear witness to the end." The words sent a slow, creeping chill through Charlie's veins, though the fire pulsed warm against his skin. He could feel it now, the truth beneath the words, the unraveling of something vast, something that had once stretched across the fabric of the world like a great, unseen current. This being, this first, was not just fading, it was being erased, and with it the fire it had given to its kin, the power that had shaped dragons into what they were, was slipping away, being pulled from the world like breath from dying lungs. Charlie clenched his fists, frustration curling inside him, hot and restless. "Then tell us how to stop it," he said, his voice firmer now, pushing against the weight of what he did not understand. "Tell us what's taking the fire." For the first time, the creature shifted, just slightly, its wings trembling as though stirred by a wind that did not exist. Its voice came softer this time, almost like a whisper against the edges of reality. "You already know." Charlie's breath caught in his throat. His mind raced, unraveling the meaning in the words, searching for the answer that had already been given. And then, in a rush, it hit him. Magic does not simply disappear. It goes somewhere. Something was not just draining the heart fire. Something was stealing it. Lena sucked in a breath, and Charlie could tell by the way her posture stiffened that she had come to the same realization. If this was the first dragon, the first fire, then it meant that the fire inside every dragon since had been connected to it, a fragment of this original ember carried forward. And if something was taking that fire, stealing it at the source, then it was not just the heart fire that would be lost. It was all of them. Every dragon, every flame that had ever burned in their lungs, every ember that had ever been kindled in the veins of their kind, it would all die. Lena turned back to the being before them, urgency rising in her voice. "Who is doing this?" The creature's golden eyes burned with something that was not quite sorrow, not quite fear, but something vast and inevitable. The one who would see the fire caged, the one who would break the sky. Charlie's blood ran cold. There was only one kind of magic that could do this. One kind of force in the world that had ever sought to claim dragons, to bend them, to shape their fire into something unnatural, something twisted and wrong. Dark magic, blood magic. A wizard, a human. Lena seemed to realize it at the same time he did. Her jaw tightened, her hands curling into fists. "Someone is trying to control it," she whispered. "They're trying to take the fire for themselves." Charlie exhaled, slow, steady, his mind catching up with the truth as it settled over him like falling ash. This was not just about the sanctuary anymore. It was not just about the dragons that were fading, the sickness that had crept into their bones. Someone was trying to steal their fire, not just their strength, but their source, the very thing that made dragons dragons. And if they succeeded, there would be no coming back from it. He turned back to the ancient being, meeting its burning gaze. "Then tell us where to find them," he said. "Tell us how to stop them." The chamber seemed to darken just slightly, the fire pulsing slow, steady, a heartbeat of dying embers. "You will find them where the fire has already been lost." Charlie swallowed hard, his mind working through the meaning. Where had the fire already been lost? Where had dragons already begun to fall silent, their flames dimming, their powers slipping away into nothingness? Then, with a slow, terrible certainty, he knew. The sanctuary. It had begun there. and they were already too late. The world around them seemed to constrict, as if the chamber itself were exhaling its final breath, as if the weight of knowledge had thickened the air, pressing against their skin, seeping into their lungs with every inhale. The fire pulsed once more, slower now, fainter, as though with each passing moment it slipped further away from the world, unraveling into something unseen, something lost. Charlie felt the heat of it still, but it was not the heat of an inferno. It was the warmth of something fading, of embers dimming beneath the weight of time. And in that moment he understood the terrible truth. The heart fire was dying not because it had reached the end of its existence, but because something was taking it away. Someone was pulling the fire from the bones of the earth itself, draining it, siphoning its power from the very source of Dragon. And if the fire was extinguished, if the last ember of this ancient force was stolen, then it would not simply be the death of the sanctuary's dragons. It would be the death of dragons entirely. Lena turned to him, her expression unreadable, but her eyes burned with the same realization, the same terrible weight of understanding. Her hands, usually so steady, so sure, trembled slightly at her sides, and when she spoke, her voice was quieter than before, but no less firm. "It's already begun," she said, not as a question, but as a certainty. The sanctuary. It's not just the first place the dragons fell ill. It's where the fire is being pulled from. She exhaled sharply, running a hand through her dark hair, her fingers tangling in the strands as if trying to anchor herself to something solid, something real. We thought the sickness was the result of something within them, something failing inside their bodies, but it was never about them at all. It was the fire itself, the source that binds them together, that makes them what they are. It's being severed. It's being stolen. Charlie swallowed hard, the truth settling into him like stone, like the shifting of tectonic plates beneath his feet. It made sense in a way that was almost cruel. Magic did not simply vanish. It did not wither like a flower in winter. It had to be taken, consumed, redirected. And whoever was behind this was not just seeking power, they were dismantling something ancient, unweaving the very essence of dragons, thread by thread, until there was nothing left but empty husks, winged creatures that would never breathe fire again. He turned his gaze back to the entity before them, to the great dragon of shadow and light, to the first fire that had ever burned. Its golden eyes met his, and in them he saw no plea, no desperation, only knowledge, only the understanding that had stretched across centuries, across millennia, waiting for this moment, waiting for someone to hear the truth. Charlie exhaled, slow and steady. "Then we don't have any time to waste." The dragon inclined its head ever so slightly, as though acknowledging the decision he had already made, the path that had already been set before him. And then, as the fire pulsed one final time, its light dimming just slightly, the great being spoke once more, its voice curling through the chamber like the last breath of a dying star. "Go. But know this, fire cannot be stolen without consequence. What is taken must be held, and what is held too long will burn." Charlie nodded, the words settling into him, though their meaning was not yet clear. He turned to Lena, their eyes meeting, and in that moment nothing needed to be said. There was no time for hesitation, no space for doubt. They had come in search of answers, and now they had them. But answers alone would not be enough. They had to act. The journey back through the mountains was not the same as their journey in. The landscape, once vast and sprawling, now felt different. The mist heavier, the cold sharper against their skin. The world itself seemed to hold its breath, as though the very air had become aware of what was at stake. Every step forward felt heavier, as though the mountain did not want them to leave, as though it knew that once they departed, the fire within would flicker lower, would weaken, would continue its slow descent into nothingness. Charlie's mind raced, turning over possibilities, searching for the missing piece, the thing that would lead them to whoever was responsible. It had to be someone with power, great power. The kind of magic that could unweave something as old as the heart fire was not something possessed by ordinary wizards. This was something deeper, darker, something fueled by knowledge long buried. He had heard whispers before, in the darkest corners of dragon lore, of wizards who had tried to bind dragons to their will, to harness their fire, to turn their power into something unnatural. But nothing had ever come of those stories, until now. "We're going to have to be careful," Lena said as they moved through the underbrush, their breath misting in the cold air. "Whoever's behind this, they won't just let us walk in and stop them. If they've come this far, if they've found a way to pull fire from the very source of dragons, then they've already gone too far to turn back." She hesitated, then added, her voice quieter, "And people like that, they don't just take magic, they become it." Charlie knew what she meant. Magic, when twisted, had a way of reshaping those who wielded it. To steal fire itself, to take something so ancient, so powerful, and make it one's own, was not an act that could be undone. Whoever had done this had already stepped beyond the boundaries of what magic was meant to be. The sanctuary came into view just as the sun began to sink behind the mountains, its walls standing tall against the darkening sky. But something was wrong. Even before they reached the gates, even before they crossed the boundary into familiar ground, Charlie felt it. The absence, no sound, no movement, no dragons. The sanctuary, once alive with the rumble of wings, the crackle of fire, the low murmuring calls of creatures as old as time, was silent. Charlie's pulse quickened. He ran the last stretch, Lena close behind, his boots kicking up dust as he crossed into the main courtyard. The pens, once filled with the sleeping forms of dragons, were empty. The torches along the walls burned, but the light felt weak, their flames too small, as though struggling to stay alive. The air was thick, heavy, charged with something unseen, something wrong. And then he saw them, Grigorovich and the others, standing in the center of the courtyard, motionless, their eyes blank, their bodies stiff as though frozen in place. And before them a figure stood, cloaked in dark robes, their face hidden beneath a hood. But Charlie didn't need to see their face to know. He could feel it. The air around them shimmered, warped, as though heat rose from unseen flames. The ground beneath the cloaked figure darkened, not with shadow, but with something deeper, something unnatural, something stolen. The fire was here, the thief was here, and they had been waiting. Charlie reached for his wand, his heart pounding, his breath slow, steady. He had always believed that fire could not be controlled, that dragons were the last untamed thing in the world, a force beyond human reach. But he was wrong. Someone had found a way, and now they would have to stop them, no matter the cost.